Adrian Volker invested $900,000 to help his son open a dream medical clinic. But when he asked about the grand opening, his daughter-in-law gave an answer that made his blood run cold. What grand opening? Within days, Adrian would discover the clinic never existed, his son had vanished, and a web of deception far bigger than anyone imagined was about to unravel. Stay until the end to find out how a trusted family member's secret empire collapsed, and how the shocking truth finally came to light. Subscribe now for more unforgettable stories of betrayal, mystery, and justice. My name is Adrian Volker. At 63 years old, I thought I had already experienced every kind of business risk imaginable. I had spent decades building a successful medical equipment company, negotiating contracts worth millions, and learning how to spot dishonesty before it could damage my investments. At least, that was what I believed. Looking back now, the biggest deception of my life wasn't committed by a business rival, a competitor, or a stranger. It came from someone inside my own family. My son, Leontes Volker, had always dreamed of opening his own medical clinic. Ever since he graduated from medical school, he talked about creating a healthcare center where patients could receive quality treatment without excessive costs. I admired that vision. When he married Vespera Klein 6 years earlier, I thought she would help him achieve that dream. Vespera was impressive from the moment I met her. She spoke confidently. She understood healthcare administration. She always seemed organized and prepared. Most importantly, she appeared completely devoted to my son. Over time, she became the primary person communicating with me regarding the clinic project. At first, that seemed perfectly normal. Leontes worked long hours at the hospital. Vespera handled planning, permits, contractors, and financial coordination. Whenever I had questions, she always had answers. Whenever delays occurred, she always had explanations. And whenever additional funding became necessary, she always had detailed documentation ready. 2 years earlier, she had presented me with what looked like a carefully prepared business plan. The proposed clinic would be located in downtown Portland. The building would feature modern examination rooms, advanced diagnostic equipment, and specialized treatment facilities. The projected revenue looked reasonable. The expenses appeared legitimate. Most importantly, my son seemed excited whenever the project was mentioned. That was enough for me. I invested. First, $250,000 for property acquisition and renovation. Months later, another $300,000 for medical equipment. Then, after construction delays supposedly increased costs, another $350,000. $900,000 in total. A significant amount, even for someone with my financial background. But I considered it an investment in family rather than a business transaction. I wasn't expecting extraordinary profits. I simply wanted to help my son build something meaningful. As months passed, progress reports continued arriving. Construction photos. Contractor updates. Licensing approvals. Equipment installation schedules. Everything appeared professional. Whenever I requested a meeting at the site, Vespera explained that active construction made visits difficult. Whenever I suggested speaking directly with contractors, she assured me they were overwhelmed by deadlines. There was always a reason. Always an explanation. Always another update promising that the grand opening was just around the corner. Eventually, after nearly 2 years of preparation, Vespera announced that the clinic would officially open the following week. I felt relieved. Finally, after all the delays and expenses, the project was becoming reality. For several days, I told friends about the upcoming opening. I even began planning a small congratulatory speech for Leontes. Then something happened that completely disrupted my confidence. The day before the scheduled grand opening, I realized I hadn't received an invitation. At first, I assumed it was a simple oversight. After all, everyone involved had been busy. Still, the situation felt strange. A father who invested $900,000 would normally receive details about such an important event. The feeling bothered me throughout the afternoon. By early evening, I decided to call Vespera directly. The call connected after several rings. "Hello, Adrian," she said. Her voice sounded different. Tense. Distracted. I ignored the feeling and smiled. "Just checking on tomorrow," I said. A brief silence followed. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "The clinic grand opening." The silence became longer. Far longer than it should have been. I frowned. Something felt wrong. Finally, she spoke. "What grand opening?" For a moment, I actually thought she was joking. I laughed softly. "The clinic opening tomorrow." Another pause. Then, another. The cheerful confidence I normally heard in her voice had completely disappeared. Instead, she sounded nervous. Almost frightened. Then she said something I still remember word for word. "Adrian, there isn't any opening tomorrow." My smile vanished instantly. I sat upright in my chair. "What are you talking about?" No answer. Only silence. The kind of silence that makes your stomach tighten before your mind understands why. "Vespera." She exhaled slowly. "I think we need to discuss some things." The moment those words left her mouth, I knew something was terribly wrong. I ended the call less than 2 minutes later. Immediately, I dialed my son's number. The automated message arrived almost instantly. "This number is no longer in service." I stared at the phone, confused. Then I called again. Same message. Again. Same result. A cold feeling settled into my chest. Leontes never changed his number without informing me. Never. I searched through recent messages. The last text from him was nearly 4 months old. At the time, I hadn't considered that unusual because Vespera had consistently acted as the project coordinator. Now, suddenly, every detail felt suspicious. Every excuse. Every delay. Every unanswered question. The more I thought about it, the worse it became. Why wasn't there a grand opening? Why had Vespera sounded nervous? Why was my son's phone disconnected? And why had I not spoken to him directly in months? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the conversation with Vespera. What grand opening? The words refused to leave my mind. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for explanations. I was going to see the clinic with my own eyes. The address was one I had seen countless times over the previous 2 years. It appeared on business plans, contractor invoices, equipment delivery schedules, and progress reports. According to every document I had received, the building was supposed to be fully operational by now. Patients should have been arriving within days. Staff should have been preparing for opening week. The parking lot should have been full. Instead, as I drove through downtown Portland that morning, an uncomfortable feeling grew stronger with every passing block. The weather was overcast. Traffic moved slowly. My hands remained tight on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe the opening had been postponed. Maybe Vespera had been stressed. Maybe there was a licensing issue. There had to be a reasonable explanation. There had to be. Then I turned onto the final street. And everything changed. I immediately noticed something wrong. The building looked nothing like the photographs I had received. Not slightly different. Completely different. I parked across the street and stared through the windshield. The structure standing before me was old and neglected. The windows were covered with dirt. Several panes were broken. The surrounding fence was rusted. No signs advertised a medical clinic. No construction crews were present. No delivery trucks. No employees. No patients. Nothing. I remained frozen in my seat for nearly a minute. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be the same property. I checked the address again. Then again. Then a third time. The numbers matched perfectly. I stepped out of the car. The air felt colder than it had earlier. As I crossed the street, the reality became impossible to ignore. The property hadn't recently failed. It hadn't been abandoned after construction. It looked as though no renovation had ever happened at all. I walked along the perimeter fence. The gate was secured with an old chain. Grass pushed through cracks in the pavement. Dust covered every visible surface. Nothing suggested recent activity. Nothing. For nearly 2 years, I had funded a project that appeared never to have existed. I circled the property once. Then twice. Each lap made me feel more foolish, more angry, more confused. Eventually, I stopped near a neighboring auto repair shop. One of the mechanics standing outside noticed me staring at the warehouse. He wiped his hands with a rag and approached. "You looking for somebody?" he asked. I hesitated. "I'm looking for a medical clinic." The mechanic laughed. "There ain't been a clinic there." My stomach tightened. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Been empty for years." A chill ran through me. Years. At least 4. I looked back toward the warehouse. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he surprised me. "You're not the first person who came asking." My attention snapped back toward him. "What do you mean?" The mechanic leaned against the wall. "Had some contractors show up months ago." I felt my pulse quicken. Contractors? Yeah. Couple different companies. I stepped closer. "What happened?" They said somebody hired them for renovation work. They showed up expecting access to the property. And they never got paid. My heartbeat became louder. The mechanic shrugged. After a while they stopped coming. I forced myself to remain calm. "Do you know who hired them?" I remember hearing a woman's name. A woman's name. For some reason, I already knew what he was about to say. The mechanic scratched his chin. "Think it was Vespera or something." My blood ran cold. Suddenly, every suspicious detail from the previous night became much harder to dismiss. I thanked him and returned to my vehicle. For several minutes, I sat motionless. The warehouse remained visible through the windshield. Silent. Empty. Mocking everything I thought I knew. Eventually, I drove to a nearby coffee shop. I ordered a drink I never touched. Instead, I opened my laptop. If the clinic existed, there would be records. Licenses. Business registrations. Medical permits. Corporate filings. Something. Anything. I spent hours searching databases. Nothing. No clinic. No registered medical corporation. No operating licenses. No public filings. Every search ended the same way. Nothing. The deeper I dug, the worse it became. Many of the company names listed on invoices appeared inactive. Several contractor registrations had expired years earlier. One equipment supplier listed in the paperwork had never even operated in Oregon. By mid-afternoon, I had stopped searching for confirmation. Now I was searching for evidence of fraud. The distinction terrified me. Around 4 o'clock, another disturbing thought occurred to me. If the clinic didn't exist, why hadn't Leontes contacted me? Even if Vespera had deceived me, surely my son would have known. Unless he didn't know. Or worse. Unless something had happened to him. The possibility felt ridiculous. Yet I couldn't ignore it. I opened social media. No recent posts. No recent photographs. No updates. Nothing. I checked professional directories. His hospital profile was gone. My hands trembled slightly as I continued searching. Then I found something. A local community bulletin. A public notice posted 3 months earlier. At first, I thought I had misread it. Then I read it again. And again. The headline remained unchanged. Missing person report. Leontes Volker. For several seconds, the words made no sense. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe properly. unable to think, unable to understand. My son had been reported missing 3 months earlier. 3 entire months. And nobody had informed me. Not the police. Not Vespera. Not anyone. I immediately clicked the notice. The details were limited. Leontes had reportedly left his residence and failed to return. The email kept me awake most of the night. I read it at least 20 times. The message contained only a single sentence and an address in Seattle. No explanation. No sender identification. No instructions beyond showing up. Under normal circumstances, I would have ignored something so suspicious. But these were no longer normal circumstances. The clinic didn't exist. $900,000 had vanished. My son had been reported missing. And now a stranger claimed to know something. By sunrise, I was already on the road. The drive from Portland to Seattle felt longer than any trip I could remember. Questions filled every mile. Who sent the email? Why contact me now? Why not go directly to the police? Most importantly, could this finally lead me to Leontes? Hours later, I entered Seattle. The address led me away from downtown and into an older residential neighborhood. The area was quiet. Modest apartment buildings lined the streets. Nothing about the location seemed connected to healthcare, business investments, or million-dollar projects. I parked across from the address and studied the building. 3 stories. A faded exterior. Several balconies. A small management office near the entrance. At first glance, it looked completely ordinary, which somehow made me even more nervous. I stepped out and approached the office. Inside sat an elderly man reading a newspaper. He looked up as the door opened. Sharp eyes, gray hair, calm expression, the kind of face that noticed details. "Can I help you?" he asked. I hesitated. "My name is Adrian Volker." The moment I said my last name, something changed in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. He folded the newspaper carefully. "I've been expecting you." Every muscle in my body tightened. "You sent the email?" The man nodded. "My name is Marlo Vance." He extended his hand. I shook it cautiously. "How do you know my son?" For several seconds, Marlo studied me, as though deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he motioned toward a chair. "You should sit down." I didn't like that answer. But I sat anyway. What followed stunned me. According to Marlo, Leontes had rented an apartment in the building for nearly 8 months. Alone. No Vespera. No clinic project. No medical partners. Nothing. The information hit me like a punch. "You're certain?" "Absolutely." I leaned forward. "When was the last time you saw him?" Marlo's expression became serious. "About 3 months ago." The exact period mentioned in the missing person report. My pulse accelerated. What happened? "He left." "Just left." Marlo nodded slowly. "But he wasn't acting normally." I waited. He seemed worried. "Worried about what?" "I don't know." The older man sighed. But during his final weeks here, he kept asking unusual questions. "What kind of questions?" Marlo glanced toward the window. He wanted to know whether strangers had been asking about him. A chill moved through me. Strangers. He seemed afraid someone was looking for him. The room suddenly felt colder. For months I had assumed Leontes was busy. Then I believed he was missing. Now I was learning he may have been hiding. The implications were disturbing. Did he ever mention Vespera? Marlo's jaw tightened slightly. Only once. I immediately noticed the change. What did he say? The elderly man hesitated, then answered. He said he wasn't sure who he could trust anymore. The words lingered in the room. not sure who he could trust anymore. I thought about every conversation I had shared with Vespera over the past 2 years. Every update. Every financial request. Every explanation. For the first time, I wondered whether my son had been trying to warn me. And I had completely missed it. A few minutes later, Marlowe stood. There's something else. I followed him outside. We walked down a narrow hallway and entered a small storage area. Rows of abandoned boxes filled the room. Marlowe stopped near a metal shelf. After Leontes left, this remained behind. He pointed toward a sealed container. My heart pounded. What's inside? I never opened it. The box was surprisingly heavy. Dust covered the lid. A shipping label displayed my son's name. With trembling hands, I removed the tape. Inside were folders, documents, receipts, several notebooks, and a small flash drive. I carefully lifted everything out. At first glance, it looked like random paperwork. Then I noticed an envelope. My name was written on the front. Adrian. Nothing else. My breathing slowed. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. Only one sentence. If anything happens to me, Vespera knows why. I stared at the words. Again. And again. The handwriting belonged to my son. There was no doubt. A knot formed in my stomach. The note wasn't proof of a crime, but it was proof of fear. Leontes had anticipated danger, and somehow Vespera was connected. I sat down on a nearby chair and began examining the remaining contents. The notebooks turned out to be journals. At first, the entries seemed ordinary. Work schedules, personal thoughts, travel plans. Then the tone changed. Gradually, subtly, suspicion appeared. Questions appeared. Concern appeared. And eventually, outright alarm. Several entries described disagreements with Vespera. Others mentioned financial inconsistencies. One page caught my attention immediately. The date was nearly a year old. The entry read, I never asked Dad for additional funding. Vespera said she already discussed it with him. I froze. Then continued reading. The next paragraph made my heart stop. I need to find out where the money is actually going. For several seconds, I couldn't move. I reread the sentence repeatedly. $900,000. The entire investment. According to this journal, my son had never requested it. Not the first payment. Not the second. Not the third. The realization was overwhelming. Every transfer I had made was based on information delivered through Vespera. Every dollar. Every decision. Every document. A horrible possibility emerged. What if Leontes had been investigating the fraud long before I realized it existed? And what if that investigation was the reason he disappeared? As evening approached, Marlowe and I continued sorting through the contents of the box. The following morning, I met the forensic accountant in a quiet office overlooking Elliott Bay. His name was Cashin Rourke. Unlike the dramatic investigators shown in movies, Cashin looked ordinary. Mid-50s. Thin-framed glasses. Calm demeanor. Measured speech. But within the first 10 minutes of our meeting, it became obvious why Marlowe trusted him. Cashin had the rare ability to make complicated financial systems seem understandable. I placed the box of documents on his desk. The journals. The bank statements. The transaction records. The company filings. Everything. He spent nearly an hour reviewing the material in silence. Occasionally he made notes. Occasionally he circled account numbers. Occasionally he frowned. None of those reactions made me feel better. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. This wasn't done by an amateur. I immediately sat forward. What does that mean? Cashin tapped one of the documents. It means whoever created this structure knew exactly how to conceal money. A cold feeling returned to my stomach. Can you trace it? He nodded slowly. Probably. How long? Several days. At that moment, several days felt like several years. But there was no alternative. So we began. For the next week, I remained in Seattle. Every morning I met with Cashin. Every afternoon we reviewed findings. And every evening I left with more questions than answers. The money trail turned out to be astonishingly complex. Each transfer passed through multiple companies. Each company connected to another. And each layer concealed the one before it. Yet, eventually patterns began emerging. The first major breakthrough arrived on the fourth day. Cashin slid a folder across the table. You need to see this. I opened it. Inside was a chart mapping dozens of transactions. The lines spread across multiple pages. The complexity was overwhelming. But one detail immediately stood out. At the center of the entire network sat a familiar name. Vespera Klein. I stared at it. Then looked at Cashin. You're certain? Very. My throat tightened. For months, I had suspected Vespera. Now the evidence directly connected her to the movement of funds. Yet another surprise followed. The money had not been spent on construction. It had not been spent on medical equipment. It had not been spent on clinic operations. Instead, it had been used to acquire luxury real estate, properties, condominiums, vacation homes, commercial investments, all purchased through layers of shell corporations. The revelation left me speechless. $900,000 intended for healthcare had been transformed into personal assets. But the worst discovery had not yet arrived. Cashin pointed toward another section of the chart. Look here. I followed his finger. Several additional names appeared. People I had never met. People I had never heard of. What am I looking at? Cashin folded his arms. A network. The word immediately caught my attention. What kind of network? A recruitment network. The room became very quiet. Cashin continued. These individuals appear connected through similar financial structures. I felt my pulse quicken. You mean other investors? He nodded. Many of them. The realization struck hard. I wasn't the only victim. Far from it. Over the next 2 days, the picture became clearer. The fake clinic had been only one project among many. Different victims received different stories. Some were told they were funding rehabilitation centers. Others believed they were supporting specialized surgical facilities. A few thought they were investing in medical research companies. The details varied. The strategy remained identical. Gain trust. Collect funds. Move the money through shell corporations. Convert the assets into property. Disappear before questions emerged. The operation appeared remarkably sophisticated. And according to the evidence, Vespera occupied a central role. Yet one question continued bothering me. If the fraud was this extensive, where did my son fit into it? The answer arrived unexpectedly. Late one afternoon, while reviewing another stack of records, Cashin discovered a series of encrypted digital files referenced in the documents. Most appeared inaccessible. But one notation stood out. A storage location. A secure digital archive. The account had been created by Leontes. Suddenly the entire investigation shifted. Until then, we had been following money. Now we were following evidence. The archive took nearly a day to access legally through investigators who had begun cooperating after reviewing Cashin's findings. When the files finally opened, the contents stunned everyone. Leontes had been documenting the fraud. 4 months. Possibly longer. Screenshots. Financial records. Internal communications. Company registrations. Personal notes. Everything had been preserved. He hadn't simply suspected wrongdoing. He had been building a case. The discovery raised another troubling possibility. If Leontes had uncovered this much information, then Vespera likely knew he was investigating. And if she knew that, the danger surrounding his disappearance became far more serious. The next breakthrough came from one of the archived communications. A private message exchange. Most of it appeared routine. Until a particular sentence caught our attention. Move everything before he finishes compiling the evidence. I read the line 3 times. Then 4. The sender's identity had been partially obscured. But investigators believed it originated from someone connected to the network. The timing matched the period shortly before Leontes vanished. For the first time, I genuinely feared he might have been harmed. That night, sleep became impossible. I sat alone in my hotel room staring at Seattle's skyline. The city lights blurred beyond the glass. My thoughts remained fixed on my son. Where was he? Was he alive? Had he been running from the people involved? Or had they already found him? Around midnight, my phone rang unexpectedly. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. I answered immediately. Hello. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then a voice said something that sent a shock through my entire body. Stop looking for the clinic. The voice was distorted, artificial, impossible to identify. I stood from the chair. Who is this? Silence. Immediate. What had started as a financial investigation was rapidly becoming something larger. The conference room fell silent as the video began. For a moment, the screen remained black. Then the image appeared. My breath caught immediately. It was Leontes, alive, sitting alone in what looked like a small office. The timestamp indicated the recording had been made several months earlier, shortly before his disappearance. For a few seconds, he simply stared into the camera. He looked exhausted. Not physically injured. Not panicked. Just deeply tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a burden for too long. Then he began speaking. If you're watching this, it means events have probably unfolded the way I expected. Nobody in the room moved. Nobody interrupted. Leontes continued. My name is Leontes Volker. I am recording this because I believe evidence connected to an ongoing fraud operation may eventually place me at risk. I felt my chest tighten. The words sounded deliberate, prepared, as though he had rehearsed them repeatedly. Over the next several minutes, he explained everything. How he first noticed discrepancies in clinic expenses. How invoices failed to match actual purchases. How company names changed unexpectedly. How financial records disappeared whenever he requested access. At first, he assumed the problems were administrative mistakes. Then he started investigating. The deeper he looked, the worse things became. Eventually, he discovered that the clinic project existed only on paper. The contractors were fake. The suppliers were fake. The construction schedules were fake. Even the photographs shown to investors had been taken from unrelated projects in other states. Every part of the operation had been carefully manufactured. I felt physically sick listening to it. Because while Leontes had been uncovering the truth, I had continued wiring money. Trusting every explanation. Believing every update. Then came the moment that changed everything. Leontes looked directly into the camera. His voice became more serious. My father did not approve these transactions through me. I lowered my eyes. The room remained completely silent. He was manipulated through separate communications. The shame hit hard. Not because my son blamed me. Because he didn't. He understood exactly what had happened. That somehow made it worse. Then Leontes revealed something none of us expected. Several months before recording the video, he had secretly approached federal investigators. At first, I thought I had misheard him. But then he repeated it. He had already reported the operation. He had already handed over evidence. And he had already begun cooperating with authorities. The room erupted into stunned silence. Cashin looked toward one of the investigators. The investigator looked equally surprised. Apparently portions of the operation had been compartmentalized so effectively that not everyone involved knew the full history. The video continued. There is something else. Leontes paused, took a breath, then spoke carefully. If this recording becomes public, I may already be under protective arrangements. Protective arrangements. The phrase immediately caught everyone's attention. Leontes continued. I agreed to disappear temporarily while investigators completed their work. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then realization swept across the room. My son hadn't vanished unexpectedly. He hadn't been abducted. He hadn't run away. He had entered protective custody. Voluntarily. As part of an investigation. A flood of emotions hit me simultaneously. Relief. Confusion, anger, gratitude. For months I had imagined countless terrible possibilities. Now I finally knew the truth. Leontes was alive. The video wasn't finished. What came next proved even more devastating for Vespera. Leontes began identifying key participants. Names, companies, properties, bank accounts, communication channels. Everything. The amount of detail was staggering. He had documented years of activity. Every major transfer. Every hidden company. Every fraudulent transaction. Every effort to conceal ownership. By the time the video ended, investigators possessed enough information to move aggressively. And they did. The response was immediate. Within 48 hours, warrants were issued. Financial institutions received emergency notices. Property transfers were frozen. Corporate registrations were flagged. Travel alerts were activated. The network that had operated comfortably for years suddenly found itself under intense scrutiny. Then the arrests began. One after another. Several individuals connected to the shell corporations were detained. Others attempted to flee. Some disappeared before authorities could reach them. But one person remained the primary target. Vespera Klein. For nearly a week, investigators tracked her movements. Every lead seemed to arrive moments too late. Every location had already been abandoned. It appeared she knew pressure was building. Then another twist emerged. Authorities discovered she had booked international travel using an alternate identity. The destination wasn't random. She was attempting to reach a country where recovering assets would become significantly more difficult. The race intensified. Finally, 6 days after the video was recovered, investigators located her at a private airport. She was preparing to leave. According to reports, she carried encrypted storage devices, financial records, and access credentials connected to multiple offshore accounts. The arrest ended years of deception in a single afternoon. When I received the call confirming her detention, I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt something different. Exhaustion. The damage had already been done. The money. The lies. The months of uncertainty. None of that disappeared simply because handcuffs had finally appeared. Still, justice was moving forward. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the truth held more power than the deception. Over the following weeks, investigators continued dismantling the operation. Property holdings were identified. Accounts were frozen. Business records were seized. Every new discovery revealed an even larger network than previously imagined. Yet amid all the developments, one question remained unanswered. When would I finally see my son? For a few moments after hearing my son's voice, I couldn't speak. Every fear I had carried for months suddenly collided with overwhelming relief. Leontes. My voice barely sounded like my own. It's me, Dad. I closed my eyes. The simple fact that he was alive felt unreal. For nearly a year, I had searched for answers. Now the person at the center of everything was finally speaking directly to me. We talked for almost an hour. There were still details he couldn't discuss over the phone. Certain aspects of the investigation remained active. Some legal proceedings were ongoing. But one thing became clear almost immediately. He was safe. Completely safe. That knowledge alone lifted a weight I had been carrying since the day I discovered the clinic didn't exist. Toward the end of the call, Leontes told me something I had been waiting to hear. I think we can finally meet. I sat upright. When? Soon. Those 4 letters felt like the best news I had received in months. A week later, I flew to Denver. The meeting location had been arranged through official channels. Security procedures remained strict. Even though many arrests had already occurred, authorities weren't taking unnecessary risks. When I arrived at the designated federal building, my emotions became difficult to control. Part of me worried the reunion wouldn't feel real until I saw him with my own eyes. Then the door opened. And there he was. Leontes. Standing only a few feet away. Older. Thinner. More serious than I remembered. But alive. Very much alive. Neither of us spoke immediately. We simply walked toward each other. The months of uncertainty disappeared in that moment. Not completely. The damage caused by the fraud still existed. The losses still existed. But my son was alive. Nothing mattered more than that. Eventually we sat together and discussed everything. Not as investigator and witness. Not as victims. As father and son. 4 hours, Leontes explained details that had never appeared in reports. How he first noticed missing funds. How he quietly gathered evidence. How investigators instructed him to limit communication. How difficult it had been to disappear without telling anyone. One part of the conversation stayed with me more than anything else. At one point, he looked directly at me and said, "I never blamed you." I looked away. Because if I was honest, I had spent months blaming myself. I should have verified the documents. I should have visited the property sooner. I should have spoken directly with him more often. I should have questioned the inconsistencies. But Leontes shook his head. That's what people like Vespera count on. He was right. Fraud doesn't succeed because victims are foolish. It succeeds because trust is exploited. That realization helped me begin letting go of some of the guilt I had been carrying. Meanwhile, the legal process continued. Over the following months, investigators recovered substantial assets connected to the operation. Not everything. Some funds had already been moved beyond recovery. Some investments had lost value. Some assets had vanished entirely. But the results exceeded expectations. Properties were seized. Accounts were liquidated. Corporate holdings were dismantled. A significant portion of investor losses was recovered, including part of my own. The financial recovery mattered. But it wasn't the most important outcome. The most important outcome was accountability. For years, Vespera had built her life around appearances. Luxury properties. Exclusive events. Prestige. Influence. Status. Every decision seemed designed to create the image of success. Ironically, that same image ultimately contributed to her downfall. The records she kept. The companies she controlled. The assets she accumulated. All of them became evidence. The empire she spent years constructing collapsed piece by piece. Properties disappeared. Accounts vanished. Business interests dissolved. The network that once appeared untouchable no longer existed. That became her true karma. Not simply arrest. Not simply prosecution. The complete destruction of everything she had built through deception. The very wealth she valued most became the trail investigators followed straight to her. As for Marlo Vance, the man who sent the mysterious email that changed everything, I remained in contact with him. Without his decision to reach out, I might never have discovered the truth. Without his storage box, the investigation could have taken years longer. His actions reminded me that sometimes the most important people in a story are the ones nobody notices at first. Cashin Rourke remained involved as well. His financial analysis became instrumental in untangling the network. More than once, investigators acknowledged that the case would have progressed far more slowly without his expertise. Several months later, life finally began moving forward. Not back to normal. Normal no longer existed. Forward. There is a difference. One afternoon, Leontes invited me to visit a property outside Portland. The moment I arrived, I noticed construction underway. Workers moved equipment. Vehicles entered and exited the site. Blueprints covered temporary office tables. The scene immediately felt familiar. Then Leontes smiled. This one is real. For the first time in a long while, I laughed. The project was exactly what he had originally dreamed about years earlier. A genuine medical clinic. Modest in size. Financially responsible. Focused on patient care rather than flashy presentations. No fake invoices. No shell companies. No fabricated updates. Just honest work. Nearly a year later, the clinic officially opened. The opening ceremony was small. No elaborate production. No grand promises. No publicity campaign. Just staff members, local families, community leaders, and people who genuinely supported the mission. This time, I stood beside my son as the doors opened. And this time, I knew every dollar had gone exactly where it was supposed to go. As I watched patients begin arriving that morning, I thought about everything that had happened. The lies. The betrayal. The missing months. The investigation. The fear. The truth. The experience changed me permanently. I learned that trust is valuable, but verification matters. I learned that warning signs rarely appear all at once. And I learned that sometimes the people who seem most trustworthy are the ones hiding the biggest secrets.